Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. We're sitting down today to talk about data and how data could be one of the best or worst things for you to focus on as you think about the next steps of your business. Hey, my name is Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast, and we're here to bring you some good advice on the actionable, tangible steps you need to take to grow your business. Now, when you're in the weeds of growing your business, a lot of times the future is uncertain. It's hard to know what decision to make. It's hard to know what to do for your business. And so a lot of times there is good data and not so good data that we can cling to that can either make good decisions or not good decisions for the next steps for your brand. We're going to be diving into all of what I mean today as we get in today's episode. But before we dive in, we got a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the podcast. If you ever thought about supporting the show, you can always reach out, Blake at goodadvicecoaching.com, or you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. All that to say, we'll be right back soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutions.llc.com to find out more. So today's conversation, I want to be really clear. You can always know it's a little bit of a spicy episode when I feel like I need to give a little disclaimer at the start of the episode. And what I'll say for today we're basically talking about the things that grab our attention that are not the things that are not very useful for our business long term, but they feel really useful. They feel really important. We're going to be talking about data that seems really punchy and reliable and meaningful, and yet how these things can actually be fairly painful and ultimately a distraction for your business. So my disclaimer for today is I'm not anti-data. I'm not knowing your numbers or anything like that. That would be an absolute far cry from the takeaway from today's episode. People who know me, they know I love data. Whenever I'm working with my customers, we're talking about revenue. We're talking about sales. I had a customer who just sent me their P&L just this last week. So we are data rich in our approach to people's businesses. However, I have noticed, though, that people tend to use data incorrectly. They tend to either rely on data that isn't as meaningful for their business, or when businesses are in that, I guess you could say like the crock pot stage, like the business is cooking a little bit, it's simmering a little bit, and there's not really much to do but wait, how business owners often will run to certain data points to try to create a sense of action rather than understanding that you're in the waiting period. You're in the period of waiting for momentum to build up, for traction to build up, and what have you. So my disclaimer, again, not anti-data. I'm a PhD candidate. I've had to use data extensively in my own education. I've had to use it extensively in my own brand. My wife gave me a hard time because I love Google Sheets. I love Excel. Well, I don't know if it's for you guys who are like massive Excel nerds. Is that offensive to say that I love Excel when really it's Google Sheets? I don't know. But I do really like Google Sheets. My wife once saw one of the Google Sheets that I had, and she was stunned. I mean, it was color coordinated. It had all these, bits of info on it. And she was like, it is like pulling teeth to talk about like the grocery shopping list. What is this? What is this? And suddenly I was in not such a great place because all those times I said, yeah, I don't have time to talk about this, or I don't want to get into this or what have you. Suddenly it was like, okay, I see you are capable. What's going on here? So all that to say, love data. Data is great. That is our baseline disclaimer for today's episode. But we got to talk about this a little bit today. Business owners, the more seasoned they get into business, the more they begin to understand what is reliable data and what is not reliable data. What is good data for the brand and what is not good data. And I'll give a few stories today. The first one that comes to mind was when I was working at a consulting company here in Northwest Arkansas. This was several years ago. We were looking at our financial documents and looking at our revenue per month. And our average revenue per month, I think it was around maybe like 200K a month or something. Well, we were looking at December, and December was $8,000. That was our revenue number. So we were making a fraction of what we were making in other months. And me being younger in business, I was stunned by this number. I was shocked by this number. And I had coworkers who were pretty undeterred by it. I was like, look at this. December, we only made 8K. And I had a coworker who was like, yeah, we did. And I was like, well, that shouldn't be the case. And he was like, well, why not? And for me, I was so passionate, I guess, around this idea of like consistent revenue, which isn't a bad thing, but this $8,000 number stuck out like a sore thumb. Now, there wasn't anything necessarily wrong about this. Thinking back contextually, we were really apprehensive about our annual revenue. I think what I was focused on that I didn't do a good job of fully being self-aware about and then communicating about was if you're typically doing 200 grand a month and like your best months are 300K, and then you have a month like December where you do 8K, there's probably some great opportunity there. Now, it doesn't mean you need to take 8K up to 200K because you have the Christmas week. I think we as a team, as a staff, I think we actually took a week off for the holidays on top of that too. Just on top of it being the holiday season for our customers. So, our outputs are less, we're less committed, I guess, as we would be in the sales cycle for other months, but there's probably still some opportunity left on the table there. So a good way for me to approach that probably would have been to say, hey, we did 8K in December. What would it take to bring that up to 50K or 60K? Where it's still, a producing month, but it's not, basically nothing. I mean, 8K is basically nothing. Where basically, we're a business that's in operation for 11 months. So I think that would have been the more appropriate way to take that conversation. Me being younger in business, being a little bit green to the business world, I was very much, I think at the time, thinking like, man, how do we get this to 200K? And there was a little bit of resistance in the room. Nothing harmful or rude or anything like that, but a little bit of like the sense I walked away from was kind of like, Blake, why is this a big deal? Like, why is this an issue? And I understand where that probably came from because I was really overly honing in on this data point that, again, the takeaway, there's probably a good takeaway from it, but it really was not the biggest thing for me to focus on at the time of our business, of our brand. I want to talk today about how we take similar approaches to things in our business where, when you run a business, and for those of you who are listening who've run a business long term, you can probably relate with this feeling of if you've been driving on the road and there's like a crazy storm happening and you really can't see more than 100 feet down the road, if even that, you're kind of like gluing yourself to the windshield because you're trying desperately to see what's ahead of you. Maybe you're on a highway and you have a car in front of you that, they have their emergency lights on just so that you can see them and track them. That is a little bit of what running a business is like. It's hard to know what tomorrow is going to bring. It's hard to know what 6 months is going to bring. And that can be good, that can be bad. Sometimes it is something so crazily chaotic and unexpected, like COVID, like a world pandemic that essentially killed some businesses overnight. It's hard to know what the future holds. And so, as business owners, approaching entrepreneurship is almost like navigating a large puzzle. And it's not just a puzzle. It's sometimes there's days when the puzzle's, it's the face side is actually down. It's upside down. You can't even see the pieces. You can just sort of vaguely like get your hands around them, or it's like doing a puzzle blindfolded. Like you're feeling the pieces, and eventually, like there's certain things that are getting a little bit more familiar the more you do it. Like you're like, oh, that's a corner piece. Like I know what that feels like. I know what that seems like. And I think that only comes from experience. But for many of us, I think it's oversimplified on social media, where you have people who they make running a business simpler than it really is. When we talk about sales, let's be very candid, everybody. Sales is difficult. It is. Sales is difficult. And I say that as someone who I feel like I don't think I'm great at sales. I think that I am better than the average salesperson. And I will say that sales is difficult. Sales is difficult because it is a full-time job, and you are also, running every other element of your business, unless you've gotten to a point where you've hired someone to do sales entirely. And even then it's difficult because you're managing that person, their outputs, navigating commission with them, compensation, what's fair, what's reasonable, what works, and all of that stuff with it. So understanding that on social media, people make things seem simpler than they are. People who get on social media and they say, oh yeah, we'll just sell more. It's easy. Same thing with leadership, by the way. Just lead them until you realize that, hey, leading people means collaborating with other people who are broken, just like we ourselves are broken. We have all of our just our muck and flaws and insecurities. And even aside from that, understanding just the complicated nature of understanding that navigating this kind of stuff, if you feel like it's a little bit harder than you thought it was going to be, you're probably in good company. Okay. So knowing the challenge that's there, what can happen is, and I don't even want to say so much like when we feel desperate. I think what's just natural to us is we're looking for those emergency lights. We're looking for the headlights. We're trying to find the signals, the signs, what have you, that will keep us on course in some way. We're looking for the lighthouse in the middle of the storm. What's the thing that's going to guide me and direct me so I can know what I need to do? And I think this is where many of us get lost in the process, where we focus too heavily on certain data points that feel really punchy, but it's not really quite the most important thing for us. Here's a good example of this. This would be like, let's say there's a roofer who 98% of his referrals, of his business comes from referrals. And he spends the course of the next month really focused on his Google Analytics data and the amount of people who are coming to his website. Now, if this is a let's not confuse things here. If this is a pronounced like intentional strategy, we're going to grow our digital presence, and we're going to get more business coming in through certain lead magnets or onto our website and booking calls with us or asking for quotes or what have you. This makes total sense. I'm not talking about that though. I'm talking about the person who doesn't have enough revenue. They don't have enough sales. Most of their business comes from word of mouth. And rather than thinking about growing their relationships, maybe being more intentional with their network, maybe finding really great partner businesses. If you're a roofer, I think of like someone who cleans gutters, for example. Rather than doing that, the person spends hours each day looking at their Google Analytics numbers. It's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense for the bottom line for how the business is currently operating. And I think again, context matters. If this is a business who they feel like they've capped out on their organic reach and they want to go to like digital advertising or things like that, then that's a pathway they can take. Then again, if they've gotten to that point, I think the point still stands because they're probably better served just hiring out someone who's going to manage that stuff and look at that stuff. Anywho, let me give you another example in like the podcasting world, because we have the podcastable business where we're launching people's podcasts and we're growing people's podcasts, doing all the production for them. One of the most common questions I get from a podcast perspective is, what day and time should I post my episode? And it's always funny to me because my response is usually 3 words. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you post your episode. What matters more now, for those who see me as being too black and white, does it matter? Yes, it does. If your episode always drops on a Saturday night at 2 a.m., you are probably not going to see the same traction you're going to see at Monday morning at 6 a.m. So does it matter? Sure. But does it matter as much as being consistent and having a pacing for recording and publishing and scheduling? No, it doesn't. But what I have found is that because hyper focusing on the data point of when I publish, because that feels more tangible than something like routine and rhythm and developing a habit around the podcast, it is easier for us as business owners to really go heavy into it's got to be on this day, it's got to be on this time, and like reading the metrics. And it's interesting too, even like with podcasters, with new podcasters, especially people who maybe they don't have much of an online tribe. And so they get to looking at their digital numbers and they're seeing 10 downloads, 15 downloads, 20 downloads. And then they're reading, and again, this is where it gets oversimplified on social media. They're reading online that, oh man, if your podcast is getting, 150 downloads, you're in the top 1%. And it's like, you're not in the top 1%. There's a million podcasts out there. Do you think you're going to launch a podcast and be in the top 100 or the top 1,000? Literally as unless you have a brand that has hundreds of thousands of followers, you're not going to see those kinds of numbers. But what happens is a business owner, rather than being comfortable with the discomfort of growing a brand, of striving, of being intentional, like committing to something, what that business owner will instead do is they will find data points that create the illusion of effective decision making and progress and momentum, when really there's no shortcut, there's no silver bullet, there's no hack. It's just hard work repeated day after day after day until you finally see the fruit of your labor. And by the way, for those of you who are thinking about starting a business, like you're wading into the world of entrepreneurship, that is what you can expect. If your thought is that if you paid for a course online and someone told you that in 6 months you could quit your job and run $1 million brand, you can know that that person is patting themselves on the back because they made a great sale off of you. But beyond that, that is the most that's going to come from that purchase. You might get some foundational stuff. You might get some good insights. But if you are stepping into the world of entrepreneurship, unless you already have a large brand, and when I say large, I don't mean like someone from your hometown likes you and talks about you and has referred business to you. I'm talking multitudes of customers, hundreds of customers. Maybe you did business development for 20 years and you have a massive network of people who've bought from you. And to go into business for yourself would be as simple as those customers transitioning to your brand, and all the complicatedness with that just would evaporate. It wouldn't even be an issue. Unless that's you, you can know that it is simply hard work. It's hard work and it is a massive time commitment. you're on a road that is going to develop an ROI for you after maybe 3 years. It's not a road that you're going to see success from after 3 months. So what'll happen though is business owners will hyper focus. They don't like that truth, and it's not. I don't think it's people's faults because again, on social media, it gets oversimplified. The road gets shortened substantially. So what happens then is a business owner, they look at their podcast download numbers and then they get like way in the weeds. They have 6 downloads on an episode. And then they start looking. So on your podcast, you can look and see at what point of the show that people stopped listening, basically. Like what percent are listening through the episode all the way to the end. So, and again, it's not that there's not a good place for this somewhere. When you're a new podcaster and you have 6 downloads, this is not data that is really all that interesting to you. It's not a significant number of downloads. You can't really infer anything about your larger tribe that you're trying to build. You can get some very generic data. And other than that, that is about it. But I have known business owners to hyper focus on the download number, but more importantly, to hyper focus on the retention number. And so they put out an episode, let's say it's 38 minutes long, and they notice by the 7-minute mark that 70% of the listeners have stopped listening, which if you have 6 people listening, 70% would be what? We'll just say 2 people for simplicity. Okay. So only 2 people are still listening. How crazy would it be for that business owner then to go back to the episode? They listen through the 38 minutes. They get to the 8-minute mark. What did I say? What did I do? Okay. So I was talking about it. Okay. But then later I'll start. Okay. So the next time I'm going to move this earlier into the conversation. Okay. I'm going to make sure I have a story at this point. Okay. Well, I'm going to also, okay. I gave that. Okay. So I'm never going to give that example again. And oh, you know what? I think I was a little bit, I don't know if I had the umph that I had at the very start of the episode. So instead, I'm going to practice. I'm going to write out a script. I'm going to practice saying it so I can keep that umph and energy the entire time. And then that way, the next episode's going to be incredible. The problem here is that you just took a process. Your process for podcasting was a 30-minute prep time before an episode, and now you've just grown it out to a 2-hour endeavor before each episode. If your goal is to grow a podcast for your B2B brand or to have any kind of tribe, you have to know that it's not the 10 episodes that you're publishing, it's the 100 plus episodes you're publishing. Do you have the capacity to publish an episode, 100 episodes that require 2 hours of prep time every time? The answer is no, absolutely not. So understand how dangerous to your limited capacity bad data can be. And I don't even really like calling it bad data because none of the data is inherently bad. It's how we interpret it, but worse, it's how we hyper focus on it. It's how we hyper focus on it. And here's a good example of this. When I was a high school teacher, so if you didn't know, I about 15 years ago, I was a high school teacher. And I remember I was teaching in the science department. I taught biology. Someone else taught chemistry and someone else taught physics. I don't know why I'm explaining this like you wouldn't know what the science subjects are. But we were in a meeting and we were looking at test scores. And they aren't the same test. Each class is taking their own individual tests. And we were in this meeting and we had this person who was in the meeting who was, I think, from the district, and they were like the data expert or something like that, which is a bit ironic considering the conversation that we're about to have. And we're talking about test scores. And I think, mine was like an entry-level biology class. The chemistry teacher was like a more, not AP, but like a more advanced science class. And then the physics class was, I think it actually was like AP. I mean, it was like the peak of what have you. So we're looking at test scores. And I think like the number of my students who passed the test was, we'll just say like 80%. I don't know what the number is. Well, for chemistry, the number of students who passed their test was like maybe 90%. And then for physics, it was like 95%, maybe 96%. So we're looking at the data. We're in this meeting, and the whole point of these meetings was to basically, um, I guess, to infer what teaching strategies are working well between the teachers, and then to take that and replicate it and the teach and basically share knowledge with one another in terms of like what's effective teaching. Again, not a bad idea. Okay, not a bad concept. But what ended up happening was it was like to one teacher, it was like, all right, hey, your students they passed 95% of them passed the test. What did you do really well? And I remember the teacher's name was Michael. He's just a no nonsense, just direct guy. And he goes, I didn't do anything. They're AP students. They're excellent students. They are very studious. They're going to study on their own, what have you. And then I remember the person asked me, they were like, so Blake, why are your students not doing that? And I was like, well, they're remedial students who really don't want to be there. And it's, it's a different group of students. It's a different types of habits that some of these students are bringing to the table. And some of them also, there's a little bit more ground to cover in that some of them are maybe just the first time in their high school career are taking their education seriously. And maybe they haven't had teachers or parents or whoever in the past who have had um, the the focus of the present time, where now they're thinking about college. It's like, oh man, I gotta get my grades in order, what have you. So, and I wasn't trying to be like excusatory. I was just like, well, I mean, they're just different classes. Well, so the data person was like, well, we can't just say that. We can't just say they're different classes. I mean, look at the percentages. Like, look at these percentages here. Like, this is a really big deal. And I remember Michael was really annoyed by this. He was like, we this is total not they're two totally different classes. Like, why would we hyper focus on like what I'm doing that he's not doing? If nothing else, we should be looking at like the progress of the students over the year. That way we can see how much growth is happening. Well, then the other like funny data point that happened here was we started looking at the difference between two of Michael's classes. And one class was, like I mentioned, like maybe like 95% passing. The other one was like 94% passing. And the data person was like, so Michael, what did you do really well with the 95% one versus the 94% one? And he was like, nothing. It's literally just random variance. Like they're basically the same number. And the data person was like, well, they're not the same number. One's 1% higher. And he's like, yeah, but it's not statistically significant. And the whole thing just like broke down into total nonsense. And that is honestly where we go today in our businesses. We get really hype. It's the flag in the storm. It's the lighthouse. It's the thing that shows us some kind of direction when we're lost or confused. It is like shameless plug. It is, by the way, the value of having a really great consultant or a coach who can say, hey, that's not a big deal. That doesn't matter. Hey, let's really focus in on this. Let's really focus in on that. And one way we see this really showing up in the business world, you've probably heard of this yourself. This is effectively shiny object syndrome. If you don't know what shiny object syndrome is, shiny object syndrome is when a business leader gets hyper focused on a trend or a technology or what have you that is really unrelated. It doesn't have the the ROI to the business that other things do, but it is the sexy thing in the moment. It is the thing that is trending that, well, you gotta have. And I'll be really direct and honest. We are there with AI right now. AI is an incredible tool. AI is amazing for a number of businesses, for the quality of life that it provides to those businesses and the things that can be automated and some incredible outcomes. But then there's a level of AI that is absolutely shiny object syndrome. I was reading about how Volkswagen is trying to get, or maybe they already have, get ChatGPT installed into all of their vehicles. At the end of the day, it's a really cool like marketing gimmick, but it doesn't affect the car at all. It doesn't affect how it drives. It doesn't affect, anything about why you buy that product. And that's going to be the case for many things. I mean, the number of times I've seen AI mentioned in like clever marketing, like, hey, we're releasing our new version of this product now with AI, but they don't say at all what the AI does, just that it has AI now. It's got to be great. It's got to be high quality, right? So there's definitely a level of that with like shiny object syndrome. Um, and also, maybe I wasn't clear on this. The implication of shiny object syndrome is that when you chase after shiny object syndrome, you will lose money because you're ultimately going for what is a fad and not what is actually the meat of your business, the thing that is compelling about your brand. I'll give another example, pulling back from that consulting group that I was with. Do you guys remember when Blue Apron was all the rage? Do y'all remember this? The meal delivery services, which I have, I don't have cable, so I could be totally out of the loop. I have not seen or heard these talked about in at least a few years. And you would almost think, and maybe they did during COVID, that these things would have skyrocketed, and they might have. I don't know. But I remember Blue Apron was massive. Let's do a little quick Google. Blue Apron revenue. Let's see. Okay. It's lost $500 million in revenue over the previous year. So, I mean, it's not doing great. That's a lot of money to lose. Yeah, they basically, their revenue has halved from $1 billion to $500 million. So, and let's look at longer term. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, this company actually has been stagnant. That number wasn't correct. This company's been stagnant. That was 2017 when they were almost $1 billion. So they've been stagnant over the last few years, even since COVID. So remember though, when this was like, I mean, we did Blue Apron. We loved Blue Apron. Well, I remember being in a consulting meeting. We were talking about like new products and services for our customers, and someone threw out the idea. They were like, "Hey, people love these meal to your door delivery services," and we were a leadership consulting company. What if we did like a to your office like leadership box? By the way, not a bad idea. And this is not to like even imply to throw that person under the bus. It's not a bad idea. I think this is what makes shiny object syndrome so challenging, is because you see the context there. You see the value. Like there are a lot of boxes checked there, positive signs that's like, yeah, people really do like this. People really do appreciate AI. We'd be crazy not to jump on it. But when your business is smaller and you don't have the excess capital to feel the brunt of wasted effort, some of these larger brands, like national brands, they can lose money, they can lose capacity, they can lose what have you, and they will still be here. For the small business owner, so many of your decisions are you're burning the ships. It may not feel like it, but you're burning the ships and hoping that you'll survive another day, another month, another year. Now, I would encourage you not to make decisions where the future of your business is on the line, but that's the simple fact of it. Our businesses are so much less elastic to change and setbacks and challenges because, again, we don't have the excess cash. We don't have a whole staff of team members. Our decisions really matter. So the encouragement then is to not chase the shiny object that seems really brilliant and sexy and what have you, without really thinking about what is the nature of, like, what is actually driving my business, what's driving my brand, and what is going to create sustainable ROI long term and not just be a flash in the pan. Me personally, what I like to focus on is a few different things. The most clear one is direct lines of revenue. What is simply bringing money into my business? What's bringing money into my brand? And then for other things, I think if I have excess, what is worth playing with and being okay with if it fails. I was talking to a business owner a few months ago. He has $50K in cash. He said, "Hey, I'm ready to invest it." I said, "Well, I wouldn't invest all of it because it's literally all you have. But could you invest 5K or 10K and try this out?" We're talking about advertising or I think marketing or something. And I said, "You could try this out. And if it goes nowhere, you've learned a valuable lesson, but your business will still have 40K. You'll still be okay." I told this story, I think, on a couple other podcasts. Maybe it was the last one, but I had a realtor come to me years ago, and she said, "Hey, I want to put my money into doing a commercial. I was approached by this business. They can do a commercial for me, and it's going to be great. It's going to bring me all this business. You're going to see my face on TV, yada, yada." And I said, "Okay, how much is it going to cost you?" And she said, "It's going to cost everything I have. It's 10K. It's all the money I have saved up for my business." And I said, "Okay. Um, if I were you, I would run away from that opportunity because no one commercial is going to absolutely transform your business, especially as a realtor, especially as someone new to the industry and just knowing how people buy. People typically see things again and again and again, and they buy as they've seen your brand, they've encountered your brand a handful of times. One commercial is not going to do that." And then she said, "Okay, what if I already bought it?" I was kind of hoping you were going to say, "Great job," because I already bought it. She didn't make it. Her business did not make it. Now, was it? I mean, it's easy for me as the outsider to be like, "See, that was why." I mean, it could have been any number of reasons. It could have been, being a realtor is such an incredibly competitive job to have. But besides the fact, as you engage with data, as you indulge yourself in different shiny objects and things that catch your attention, make sure that you are not making decisions where the soul of your business is on the line, but you are able to make mistakes and it be okay. I had a great mentor, Chuck Hyde, was a boss that I had at one point. The way he talked about it was rubber balls and crystal balls. It is totally okay to drop a rubber ball because you'll bounce back. When you drop a crystal ball, though, there are just certain things, certain elements of your business that you want to be incredibly careful with what you do and decide. So if you want data, there's no shortage of data that you can find about your business. Hone in on the stuff that really matters and tie that to your bottom line, your revenue. Hey, that's today's good advice. If you have any other insights or thoughts about today's episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. It was a lot of fun talking through this episode today. I appreciate you listening. We're always bringing good advice a couple of times a week. Remember, if you want to support the show, you can reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com, or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/goodadvice for as little as $5 a month. Again, thank you for listening, and thank you to those of you who support the podcast. We'll catch you later. See ya.